Hello and welcome to the Very Good Sports Podcast. I will start off by saying, as I was talking about on Twitter this week, going to try and do one of these Monday through Friday. So setting up schedule for that right now. It's going to be fun. Today, joining me is my good friend, always just been like a brother on Twitter and everything. Seen him grow as NFL draft analyst, just doing amazing work. My good friend Derrik, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing pretty good. A little bit under the weather, but I think I'm ready to do this.
So being under the weather, is that why you're not running your 40 today?
Yeah, gotta wait for that to do it at my pro day.
All right, sounds good, man. So we are previewing the Ravens offseason, and no better way to start out than looking at the salary cap. As of now, I mean, they're looking at just pocket change of $3 million. But there's a bunch of options, to clear cap space. Let's talk about some of them, starting with Haloti Ngata, could free $8.5 million by cutting him. Do you think this is a realistic possibility?
I think it's definitely a realistic possibility, but I definitely don't want it to happen. Like, Nada has been our core player on defense ever since we drafted him, and I think he's definitely someone you need on the defensive line. I mean, we have Brandon Williams, who's definitely very good. I don't even think people know how good he is yet. Timmy Jernigan is very good. Canty is an okay five tech. So we have a lot of other good defensive linemen, but Nada brings a lot more to the table, and he's a lot more disruptive than any of those other guys, and he can do a lot more than they can. So I think not having him back on the team next year would definitely hurt. I think he's a guy you want to keep on the roster as long as you can.
Yeah, you mentioned Brandon Williams, who, I mean, I remember before the season started, you were talking about him as this is a guy who was going to break out, and sure enough, he did.
hmm
And you mentioned you mentioned some looking at some other cuts. I mean, obviously they could free up. These are small cuts, some of them, 750,000 by cutting Jacoby Jones.
I
They can
do it.
free up.
Jacoby sucks, honestly. Like, he's terrible at football. People freaked out after that playoff run, and he had a few good catches. Like, he is not good. He's probably like the sixth best receiver on the team. So cutting him is no problem at all.
It's a free 750,000.
Exactly.
Chris Canny, who you mentioned, you can cut 2.2 million by cutting him. Do you think,
Um, Kanji is solid, uh, but he's definitely replaceable. So if you could probably find someone for a little cheaper, or what I've been thinking is um, I don't know if he's going to be there at 26, but Arik Armstead of Oregon is a dude I've really been pushing ever since I watched him, and he's like his floor is like a Chris Canty type of guy. So if we could get rid of Canty right now and then just draft a younger guy to completely replace his role, I'm all for that. And I know that's projecting a lot, but Canty, I'm okay either way. What we do with him, he's a solid guy, but he's not someone we need back.
I mean, I'd love to see that Rick Armstead. Represents the 916 Sacramento. In a situation like Baltimore, I think that would definitely be a good fit. I mean, you're talking about cutting Canty, that's freeing up 2.2 million. And then another option with this is punter Sam Koch or whatever it is. I'm not sure. But you can free up 2.5 million by releasing him because Ravens have Justin Tucker free agent this season. He's going to be wanting some money, even though he's a kicker.
Yeah, as good a punter as he is, I think that's definitely something that you can just replace, especially with needing to pay Tucker, like you said. So uh, I don't know if they're really thinking about cutting him or not, but if they want to, I have no qualms with that.
And I think we've seen a little bit of trend at least last year with you look at these kickers and punters. There's some good guys out there, but teams decide, you know what, I'd rather draft a rookie and pay him like $700,000 than pay a good punter $2-3 million.
hmm
And is there any other players you think they could jump out as potential cuts to save money?
um, Wait, players that Baltimore could cut for big money?
Players that Baltimore could cut to save money.
Um, I mean, outside of these guys, not really. Um, Cut. I can't think of guys that we could cut and really save money, but I know there's definitely guys that are going to be free agents that we don't need to sign back.
Yeah, you
Like,
mentioned yeah, you mentioned the free agents. I mean, guys like Owen. I mean, these are the more notable guys, but Owen
mhm.
Daniels, Justin Forsett, Justin Tucker, Torrey Smith, Pernell McPhee, who was just reported a few minutes ago that is very unlikely he returns to the Ravens. So, of these
Mhm.
guys, who do you think is brought back?
Um, I don't know if Daniels is just because he was definitely brought in as a Kubiak signing, and now Kubiak's gone. Um, and he's like, Owen Daniels actually had a pretty underrated year, and he's not spectacular. He's someone I'd like to see back, but I don't know the likelihood of him coming back, especially since he was only signed to a 1-year deal. Um, Forsett, I think he was kind of another Kubiak signing, but he fits that Trustman mold of running back. So, and him coming off, the really good season that he had, I think he's definitely a guy that has a good likelihood of coming back. Tucker, I think he's definitely coming back. I'd have no question about that. Torrey Smith, I know there's good relations with the team, and he loves the area, so maybe he could take, a little less money here than he would elsewhere. But like Torrey Smith wasn't good last year. Like he was arguably the third best receiver on the team. Um, and I know his role was a lot different than like Kamar Aiken's was, but in their respective role, you could argue that Kamar Aiken was doing more than Torrey Smith was. And Torrey Smith, he's a deep. His big thing is being a deep threat, but there were a lot of deep opportunities that he just completely missed and dropped a pass or something like that, or couldn't, get his body in position. Um, and I think maybe he could have a rebound year because I know Torrey Smith is better than he played last year. But I think, if he's not back, I have no issues with him not coming back, especially since we need to draft a receiver anyway. So we could draft a receiver, 26, and have him take over the number one role. And then with Pernell McPhee, as much as I wanted him back and as productive as a rusher as I thought he was, it doesn't look like he's coming back. So I just wish him the best wherever he ends up.
Hey, read Torrey Smith. I mean, look at the free agent market. Des Bryant's likely to get the franchise tag, as is Demaryius Thomas. So really, Torrey Smith could be one of those top. It's not great, but one of the top guys on the market. And in that situation, those guys tend to get overpaid. So
Mhm.
if Torrey Smith leaves, who do you think could step up in his place, either currently on the roster or potentially in the draft?
Um, I'm not really sure there's a guy on the roster who can do what he did. Steve Smith is definitely not that guy. He's just, possession, get him the ball. Kamar Aiken is kind of more of a slot. Kamar Aiken is like if Jacoby Jones was actually good at football. That's why I like Kamar Aiken. Uh, and then we have Michael Campanaro, who's that, short, quick receiver that's going to work the middle of the field and the flats and stuff like that. So he's not really a Torrey Smith type. Marlon Brown is big, and he's sort of a deep threat, but more in the sense that you're comfortable with him catching down the field as opposed to him, getting open downfield. So, and then Jeremy Butler, I don't think is quite like a Torrey Smith type either. So I think it's definitely something we're gonna have to look for in the draft. And if they want, that type of guy in the draft, Sammy Coates is someone they could look at. I don't want him in the first round, but he definitely fits that Torrey Smith mold. Um, you could also go Kevin White, who just ran a ridiculous 40 that I didn't expect from him. Um, I think those are definitely two guys that you could look for in that type of Torrey Smith role if they want to stay in that direction.
And talking about the draft, I mean, I have to ask this in terms of the Ravens' needs. Are they going to take running back with all of their draft picks? Since clearly that's the idea
Every
people have.
single one. That's what they got to do, obviously. They have to take a running back with every single pick. Hell, we might even trade up and take 2 first-rounders.
There you go.
uh, but really, I think what I want to see Baltimore do is I think with this cornerback class, there's not bound to be a guy at 26, but there's a good chance that someone very good is there at 26. maybe they want to take a chance on Marcus Peters if he's still there. I've seen a little bit of PJ Williams. He fits that big physical profile that I want on the outside, along with Jimmy Smith. I know Trey Waynes is sort of like a Jimmy Smith type cornerback. He's not quite as quick, but I think he can still be a good number two, high-end number two. And if they don't want to go cornerback, I definitely want to see him go receiver, like like a Kevin White. If they take Jalen Strong, that's a tad sweet for me, but I think Jalen Strong's a good player. Who else is that receiver? People have talked about Funchess at 26, and I'm not a big Funchess guy, but he's super athletic, and I could see Flacco liking a guy like Devin Funchess, so I'm not as opposed to it as I was, maybe a month ago. Those are definitely three guys I could see them targeting. If they want to go defensive line, like I said, Arik Armstead, I don't want to see them go with like a one-tech type because we have Brandon Williams and Timmy Jernigan, so I think that would not be a waste of a pick because I think you can always use big guys up front, but I don't think that's where I want to see them go. Those are the big things, and I don't think there's a tight end that I'd want to see them take at 26. If they took a running back, I know a lot of guys like Gordon and Gurley, but I think I definitely prefer Duke Johnson, especially for how Trestman runs his offense. Because Duke Johnson can do everything, and not that the other guys can't, but I think Duke Johnson is very well-rounded, very balanced, and there's a little bit more that he can provide that maybe the other two can't.
Well, going to Marcus Peters, who I was watching recently this week and just fell in love with. I get that there are character concerns, although if you look at the choking incident, Washington coaches have downplayed that, saying it doesn't happen, and things have been rectified. If he were there for Baltimore, I think you have to turn in the pick immediately and land him. Trey Waynes, I liked him more in the late first round, so I think he could be there for Baltimore, although there are some that are higher on him. I think that going corner could definitely be a fit. Arik Armstead, we talked about. I mean, I'd love to see him, as you mentioned. At worst, he's a Chris Kennedy replacement guy, but at his ceiling, it is through the roof.
Yeah. His ceiling, he's like, I was talking about this with Ben Natan. He brought up Calais Campbell first, and I think, that's kind of his ceiling, and with his floor being Chris Canty. So Armstead is definitely a guy I really fell in love with when I watched him.
Now, one wide receiver I know you're not high on is Devontae Parker. And obviously, going back, there was a lot of Devontae Parker fans that weren't a fan of that. So looking at Devontae Parker, where do you think he needs to improve?
I think his big thing is he's not as quick in and out of breaks as people thinks he is. And I also think he's not as good with bodies around him as people think he is. He's definitely good at high pointing. Like, he's amazing at getting up and plucking the ball out of the air. But if he has to fight with, a body or two around him, I think he's a little bit more uncomfortable than we've given him credit for. And I think that showed in the Notre Dame game. He kind of struggled adjusting around guys. Florida State game is another one. He burned PJ Williams, but that was just because he's incredible off the line of the scrimmage, and PJ Williams struggles there. But Parker, he's a solid player. I still have, like a top 50 grade on him, and that's. I think I'd rather we take him than Funchess at 26. But him at 26 is a little too sweet for me. He's a solid player, but I don't think he's going to be a number one.
And you'd also mentioned, obviously, we talked about the running backs and how, first-round running back, given Baltimore's offensive line, I think they can do without. But you also mentioned Duke Johnson and how he fits with Trestman. And I agree. We saw how Trestman used Matt Forte last season. Forte had 101 receptions, which set the NFL record. And Duke Johnson's the type of guy that can be in that type of role.
Exactly, and that's why I definitely like him. Melvin Gordon is definitely a very good space runner, and I'm not saying he can't catch. I'm just saying, he hasn't proven it in mass quantity that he can go out there and catch and run routes. And I'm definitely not saying he can't. I'm pretty confident that he could. It's just, Duke Johnson has definitely proven that he can get open downfield, or even in the flats. He's a very good screen type receiver. And then as a runner, Duke Johnson's vision is very good, and more than anything, especially more so than like Gordon and Gurley are, Duke Johnson is a very efficient runner. His balance, like he can get hit behind the line of scrimmage, and find a way to get back to the line of scrimmage. And I'm not saying guys like Gordon and Gurley can't, but there's something about Duke Johnson. He knows how to stay on his feet and fall forward every single time he touches the ball, and that's why I really value Duke Johnson.
And no, with him, I mean, he's the type of guy, because of the focus on Gordon and Gurley and even Amir Abdullah, you can get Duke Johnson round 3 or round 4, spend your first 2 picks on bigger needs, and you're still going to get a running back who fits perfectly in Mark Trestman's system. You mentioned the balance, and just if you're looking for a Justin Forsett replacement, I think that this is the guy who really can fill in well and thrive as a rookie.
Yeah, for sure. And then if they want to go, definitely like a mid-round guy, I think Duke Johnson is gone by the second round. But if they want to go, with the third, fourth round guy, Jay Ajayi is definitely a guy I like. He's just, he's another guy who keeps it balanced. And I think people misinterpret that for power with Ajayi. I don't think he's super powerful, but he just knows how to stay on his feet, and he's a big guy. And then Mike Davis has gotten lost in this shuffle of running backs. People like talk about how great this running back class is, and just kind of forgot about Mike Davis. But I think Mike Davis is really good. He can do it all. He's a strong runner. He's really quick for his size. He can catch passes. He can do it in traffic. It's just Mike Davis is a guy that can do everything, and knowing how Trestman is, that's definitely what I value.
So looking at when the Ravens are on the clock at 26, let's put you in a situation where Marcus Peters, Trey Waynes, Kevin White are all off the board. You're on the clock at that pick. Who are you taking?
If Arik Armstead is still there, there's no question I'm taking Arik Armstead. If he's not there, like I said, I'd be okay with Jalen Strong. I'm not a huge Devontae Parker guy, but if they took him, I wouldn't be happy about it, but I wouldn't really be too upset. I don't know too many other corners that would really fit in that spot. So I think Armstead, Funchess, and Parker are definitely the 3 guys that I would consider over anyone. But definitely Armstead. Like, if he's there, there's no question that's what I'm taking.
And this just in, John Gruden loves all of that. Every player you mentioned and all the players you didn't mention, he loves all of them at the 26th pick.
I'm sure he does.
All right, so I know you've been spending a lot of time looking at this quarterback class. I mean, obviously top 2 guys, Mariota and Winston, there's a big, not a big deal, but some people are a little bit concerned about Winston's 4.99 40 time, which, if you're concerned over that, I think you're not understanding what the quarterback position is, respectfully.
Mm-hmm.
But another guy we've talked about a couple months ago is Brandon Bridge. Just tell everyone about Brandon Bridge, what you like about him, and where he needs to improve.
Air Canada is awesome. And he's called that because I think he's from Montreal or something. But Brandon Bridge, I've always explained, is like if you think about Cam Newton as a high school senior, and that's what Brandon Bridge is right now. He has this absolute cannon of an arm, and it shows up, like his arm shows up, and he doesn't even have his feet set. So like I can only imagine how deadly he could be if you were to set his feet more and not open so wide if he's throwing a hitch, or just not not have his feet pointing. What am I trying to say? Like his feet are lateral, like he's standing in line for something as opposed to getting his front foot out and throwing. So I think if he could get better at that, he would just be an absolutely deadly passer. And then his athleticism is just outstanding. Like a lot of people have compared him to Kaepernick in that regard, and I think he's about about as fast as Kaepernick is, but I think his explosiveness is better than Kaepernick's is. I think his athleticism isn't quite as good as Marcus Mariota is, because Marcus Mariota is a little bit like Marcus Mariota's explosiveness in the pocket is something I've not seen in my few years of scouting. But Brandon Bridge is definitely a guy who's going to escape any situation, and he has the arm to make absolutely any throw. And I know Justice, his whole ideology with taking these later round quarterbacks is a guy who has an arm and has athleticism. Because, say on a long third down, if you need a guy to make a play, that's the guy that's going to make the play. Not the tall, lead-footed guy who only has an average arm. There's a lot less chance he's going to make a play as opposed to this explosive athlete. Brandon Bridge definitely needs to be more accurate. He needs to get his feet out in front of him more often, and he needs to definitely read the field a little bit better, especially like linebackers. He's sort of definitely calling Kaepernick-ish in that area. But he's very intriguing. I don't think I draft him because there's only 3 guys I draft, Mariota, Winston, and Hundley. But Bridge is definitely the first guy I call after the draft and say, do you want to come play for my team?
Yeah, I remember watching Brandon Bridge, and I can't, but there are specific plays that still stand out in your mind, just being able to slip out a tackle and just unleash a cannon, even if the platform is bad.
Mm-hmm.
But these are balls that are just on a rope 50 yards down the field.
Yeah, exactly. And I was talking to someone on Twitter, and he had just watched Brandon Bridge, and he gifted one of the plays, and it's Brandon Bridge, escapes the pocket, rolls out to his left, and is throwing, jumping off of just his left foot and drops, a 40-yard dime that, no other quarterback in college football makes. And plays like that, like you said, just stick in your mind, and it's you can't teach that type of thing. And if you can get him to get a little bit better at the things that you can teach, I think he could be a solid quarterback. It's just that who knows if he can learn those things.
And going back to Justice, and also when we talked, because you mentioned that Brandon Bridge, he's a guy that's going to need 2 to 3 years to develop, which many teams these days aren't willing to do. But Justice mentioned this in his mock draft a few months ago, and I just fell in love with it. Was Brandon Bridge as a fit for Green Bay, Mike McCarthy, letting him sit behind Aaron Rodgers for multiple years, and having McCarthy work with him on his footwork and reading the field, and it's just a fit I fell in love with. How do you feel about that as a fit?
That would definitely be one of the best fits for Brandon Bridge, because I think Rodgers plays a lot more loose than people like to give him credit for, and Brandon Bridge is a pretty loose quarterback, and I think to learn the nuances of the game, but behind someone that also plays loose like that would be very good for someone like Brandon Bridge.
And you said it, Rodgers absolutely does play loose.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mentioned this earlier. You mentioned before the season Brandon Williams as a big guy for your breakout candidate last year, and sure enough, he broke out. You also mentioned Kyle Juszczyk.
Yeah, Juszczyk.
And he had a very good season. So I know it's early, but looking at the Ravens, who's a player you think could break out in 2015?
I almost want to say Crockett Gilmore, just because, I don't know if Owen Daniels is going to be back, so he'd be forced into the number 1 tight end role. But I'm not overly confident in him doing that. So if I had to pick someone on, I think, defensive side of the ball, it would be Terrence Brooks. He flashed some pretty, very good play last year, but there were also some moments where he just looked very mentally slow. And I think with another offseason, a lot better. And hold up. My mind went blank for a second. I think having him sit for another year and learn the game and pick up on quarterback play and what they're looking at, and just get more adjusted to the NFL, I think he'd be a lot better. And he's definitely the free safety that we needed to complement, Will Hill. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I mentioned him earlier. I'd say Kamar Aiken. Kamar Aiken, like I said, like if Jacoby Jones was actually good at playing football, he can play the slot and stretch the side of the field. He can come over on crossers and create yards after the catch. He's just a very dynamic player. I think Campanaro is a better receiver than Kamar Aiken, but Aiken is more dynamic and he's going to be able to create more big plays. I think that's going to be a fun player to watch.
And by the way, just people watching, I apologize for the technical difficulties of it bouncing back and forth between screens. Not sure what's going on there. So you mentioned all those guys who are breakout, and one thing that I absolutely want to get to because I've been really impressed by it. You've been doing a lot of work for Football Savages lately, and now they have an NFL Draft prototype series. You've done NFL Draft prototype quarterback, safeties, off-ball linebackers, which just came out a few days ago. Well, so let's talk about that series, starting with the NFL Draft prototype quarterbacks.
So a couple of weeks ago, Ben Hahn, who is on the Football Saturday, came to me and he wanted to do this series where he picked 5 traits for every position and build the type players. And I thought it was a really cool idea. And he said, "You want to do half of them, and I'll do half of them too." I said, "Sure." And I got quarterbacks, safeties, off-ball linebackers, offensive tackles, which that one is going to drop today. Offensive guards. I think that might have been it. But yeah, those are the ones I've taken. And the quarterbacks, that one was pretty easy to tell. It was going to be dominated by Mariota and Winston. But I gave Arm to Bridge. I think the offensive tackles one was the hardest one to do because I think with a lot of the traits there was 2 or 3 guys you could argue as winning that trait. So that one I think was definitely the hardest to choose, but maybe the one I had the most fun with. And then the off-ball linebacker one was pretty much a Shaq Thompson scouting report because Shaq Thompson's he's a special player. I don't have like a full big board. But if I were to, list my top 3 players, it would be Leonard Williams, Shaq Thompson, and Lyle Collins. It would be those 3. But yeah, I think I have the guard piece, and I'm trying to remember if I have any other positions that are mine, but I'm not sure I do. But it's been a really fun series.
Yeah, and I've been really impressed with football. Credit Football Savages for doing it. I think it's incredible work that not a lot of sites do, going through all the positions. You mentioned the offensive line, Lyle Collins, who I know you love. What are some of the big? Because there's some questions about if he can play at left tackle. Why do you think he can play at left tackle at the next level?
Okay, the thing with Lyle Collins is people think he's too laterally slow, and I'm not saying he's good at moving laterally. He's about average in the way he can move laterally across the line of scrimmage, but that's not where he wins. Where he wins is being a lot stronger than the guy in front of him. His punch just stops defenders in their tracks, and then he has I was also talking to Ben about this, what we call functional length. People were a little bit worried about his arm length being average, but it's the way that he uses it and how strong he is forcing guys outside of the pocket that he's going to win. Maybe a guy gets a half step edge over him, bending the arc, but Lyle Collins is so strong that he's going to force you behind the pocket. And then if you try to work back inside, he just has these big meaty hands that are just going to pin you, and I think he doesn't mirror all that well, but what he does is he forces guys to play at his speed, and that's why I think he's still going to be a very good left tackle. Could he move to guard and be very good at guard? Yes, but I think he's also going to be a very good left tackle. You don't need to move him in at guard.
With his punch, it's one of those things where no matter what type of rusher you are, you have a plan to go against him, but once you get hit by that punch,
you're stuck.
You have to go to plan B.
Exactly, and that's why guys that can punch powerfully, quickly, and on time, and at the right spot are guys that are going to be very good tackles, and that's why I really like Lyle Collins.
And I think we've seen also, because the focus on arm length. It's great to have long arms, but if you can't deliver those punches aren't powerful, if you can't deliver them in the right spot, your arms don't matter. It's going to be flailing.
I said something like this on Twitter. Zach Martin's arms were only like a half an inch shorter than Lyle Collins's were, but Zach Martin didn't have that functional length to force guys behind the pocket all the time and force guys to play at his speed on the perimeter. But you move him into guard, and forcing guys to play to your left and to your right isn't as big as an issue, and he could more easily just sit there and punch guys in the chest when there's less room to work with. Lyle Collins does a good job at being able to play in space and hit guys that are left and right, and that's why I think he has that functional length. So does his length show up that great on paper? No, but it shows up on film, and that's really where it matters.
All right. Yeah, and I think that with this combine, there's a lot. Even though people try and avoid it, it's like with other things. Once it happens in that present moment, they get caught up in it, and they lose themselves away from the film for might be a week or 2 weeks, but they lose themselves in the film and overreact to measurements. All right, so we do have a few minutes left, and because obviously you are a great friend on Twitter and you do incredible work, so I have to ask you, do you have any hot takes?
Hot takes. Let's see. I kind of said earlier that there are only 3 quarterbacks I would draft in this class, which is Winston, Mariota, and Hundley. And even Hundley, like, people are talking about, like, oh, he's going to go second round. Like, I wouldn't take him in the second round. I wouldn't take him until, like, the late third round. And then, some people are wanting Grayson or Petty, or, some are even talking about Blake Sims, in the mid to late rounds. And, like, I wouldn't touch any of them with a draft pick either. I don't really know if I have many hot takes other than that. I haven't dug too deep into this class. Maybe I think my Landon Collins take, I think I mentioned it on an earlier Savages podcast. Like, Landon Collins is not a first-round safety. I don't even know if he's a second-round safety. Because, like, the way I said it is, with a position that revolves so much around being rangy, why take a guy that has questionable range very high? Like, you're going to have to make a role just for him. And that can work in the right defense. But, for most teams, it's just not going to work. So it's going to be tough to take a guy like Landon Collins high unless you have the luxury of a very good free safety.
I like it. So now we have a Derrik hot take. Just Twitter, I want you to run with it, turn it into something bigger than it is. Go crazy, okay? One other thing I want to mention, you mentioned, just going back a few minutes ago, you mentioned with the quarterbacks, and you said you have 3 draftable quarterbacks. Just, I've been thinking about it. Do you think that there's anything to some draft analysts feeling the need to, in a sense, rank all these quarterbacks and try and place them into certain spots in the draft when really they could just say, listen, this is a bad quarterback class, and really there's not many guys I want to draft in this class. Would you see that could be an issue?
Are you saying like analysts ranking guys just for the sake of having rankings there?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, like I've seen people have 25 quarterbacks deep in their rankings or something, and I have 15 that I ranked, and like even that is too many because this class is just awful. Like my last maybe 5 or so, like I wouldn't even consider signing as a undrafted free agent. So like this quarterback class is just bad. And people are ranking like 20 deep, and it's like, why? I mean, maybe like at most 5 or 6 of these guys are worth draft picks, and at most maybe 12 of these guys are worth signing. So, why really go any farther than that? Like, these guys are just bad, and we should kind of just accept that.
I like it. And, the one thing this always happens when looking forward to the next draft class. So is 2016 going to be the best or most loaded draft class ever, as is said, for the 2014, 2013, 2015, 2017 class?
It's always better. The next class is always better than the one before. Every year.
All right, so we've been going for about 35 minutes. Derrik, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Really, I've been wanting to get you on preview the Ravens off season. There's no Raiders talk here, not ever again. But so thank you so much for coming on. And where can people follow you on Twitter?
Yeah, it was a ton of fun, Matt. I really had fun talking today. You can find my work at footballsavages.com. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at QBClass, QBKLASS.
Excellent. I will give a shout out to Football Savages. I mean, they have the Draft Savages podcast, which is incredible. Seen it multiple times. Everyone be sure to check that out. They have the Prototype series. They have Ben. They have Derrik. They have a great staff of writers over there, so be sure to check them out as well. And that wraps up the show for today. I want to thank everyone for listening. I want to thank Derrik for coming on.